ever feel like, science has it all figured out? You know, like we're just brains in jars and every single thought, every feeling, it's all like mapped out.
Yeah.
But today we're diving into a field that's like, hold on a sec, not so fast.
Right.
We're tackling that wild world of consciousness.
Yeah.
How do our inner experiences actually fit into that picture?
Yeah, we often think of science as this like purely objective pursuit, right?
Right.
But when it comes to consciousness, the subjective, like your personal experience, that plays a huge role too.
Totally. Because it's one thing to be able to, like, measure brain waves and all that.
Yeah.
But to actually explain the feeling of being aware, like experiencing something,
Hmm.
that's a whole other ball game.
And that's where today's deep dive gets really interesting. We're looking at the work of Marek Pokropski,
Okay.
specifically his book, Mechanisms and Consciousness, where he's kind of saying that we've been ignoring this like crucial piece of the puzzle,
Right.
this thing called phenomenology.
Okay, phenomenology. I'm not going to lie, that sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break that down for us?
Essentially, it's about studying subjective experience, but like in a systematic way. So not just like your fleeting feelings,
Right.
but the actual structure, the rules of how we even experience the world around us.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So instead of shying away from the subjective, because it's like, ooh, that's squishy, we can't quantify that.
Right, exactly.
Phenomenology gives us like a framework to actually study it.
Yes.
That's fascinating. So what's Pokropski's, what's his take on how this actually helps us understand this whole consciousness thing?
So he argues that phenomenology kind of lets us build this bridge between those like subjective experiences we're talking about and what's actually happening in our brains.
Okay.
So like it's not about, reducing your rich inner life to just neurons firing, right?
Yeah.
It's more about like understanding the connections between the two.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. So instead of these two totally separate things, the subjective world and then like the brain stuff, right?
Yeah.
Phenomenology helps us see how they actually work together.
Precisely. And Pokropski, he highlights this with this concept called naturalizing phenomenology, which essentially means like finding ways to ground our subjective experiences in the physical world.
Okay, I'm curious. What does that look like in practice? Like, how do we actually naturalize something as kind of intangible as subjective experience?
Okay, so let's take, for example, spatial awareness,
Okay.
your sense of where you are in the world.
Right.
We totally take that for granted, right? But our brains are constantly creating this map of our surroundings.
That's wild.
And Pokropski points to the evolution of our olfactory system, so our sense of smell,
Okay.
as a key factor here.
Wait, smell. I never
Yeah.
would put those two together.
I know, it's fascinating, right? But think about it. For like our distant ancestors, smell was crucial for survival, sniffing out food, avoiding, predators, navigating their environment. This ability to basically like smell your way through the world,
Yeah.
it actually laid the groundwork for how our brains even understand spatial relationships.
So you're saying, like, my sense of direction might actually be thanks to my ancestors trying to sniff out dinner?
Yeah,
That's kind of a mind-blowing takeaway, honestly.
it is.
But okay, so our sense of smell helped shape our understanding of space. Where does the actual brain fit into all of this?
So this is where it gets even more interesting.
Great.
Research actually suggests that the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's heavily involved in memory and spatial navigation, it actually creates maps of our surroundings, kind of like those early olfactory maps we were talking about.
So even though we're not, like, relying on our sense of smell to navigate in the same way that, like, our ancestors did,
Right.
that ancient system essentially, like, paved the way for how our brains understand space today.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
It really highlights how deeply intertwined our subjective experiences are with, like, our physical evolution and our brain functions.
Wow.
And this is just one example of how naturalizing phenomenology can lead to these, like, really surprising insights.
This is already making me look at my own sense of space differently, I'm not going to lie. But what about feelings?
Yeah.
Those seem even more difficult to pin down than something like spatial awareness.
Yeah.
Can we really map emotions in the same way?
That's a question that Pokropski tackles head on.
Okay.
While it might seem kind of impossible to, like, I don't know, put a number on how much you love your dog.
Right. That seems like a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. But the key here isn't to actually quantify the feeling itself, but to map the structure of that experience over time.
Okay, I think I'm starting to follow you.
Yeah.
So instead of saying like love equals 10, we're looking at how the experience of love kind of unfolds, the different like stages or aspects it might have.
Yeah, you got it. Think of it like tracking the path of a hurricane, right? We can't predict every single gust of wind, but we can map its overall trajectory.
Right.
And similarly, we can use mathematical models to kind of represent how experiences, even complex ones like emotions, how they change and evolve.
That makes a lot more sense. But how do we even begin to map something as like fluid and personal as an emotion?
So one way is through something called dynamical systems theory,
Okay.
which allows us to visualize the different phases of an experience. Take, for instance, an epileptic seizure.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
So each phase of a seizure, from like the initial sensations to the loss of awareness and then like the recovery, each of those has a different feel to it, right?
Yeah.
And while we can't directly measure those feelings, we can map how they transition, how one phase kind of flows into the next using this dynamical systems approach.
So instead of trying to assign a numerical value to the feeling itself, we're mapping its trajectory over time.
Exactly.
That's incredibly clever.
And importantly, just because we're, exploring these mechanisms behind an experience like a seizure, it doesn't diminish the very real, very personal reality of what someone going through that is experiencing. It's about gaining a deeper understanding, not like reducing or explaining away their experience.
I love that perspective. It's about respecting the complexity of human experience while also trying to understand it on this deeper level.
Yeah,
Like we're adding layers to the picture, not just flattening it out.
exactly. And to further explore these layers, Pokropski introduces this really fascinating concept he calls functional phenomenology.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. But before we dive into that, I think we need to take a quick breather and let our listeners process all this mind-bending information. We'll be back in a flash to unpack functional phenomenology and explore more about how these ideas can actually impact your life. Stay tuned.
And we're back, still diving deep into the world of phenomenology and how it
Yeah.
intertwines with all that good cognitive science stuff.
Before the break, we left off with this really tantalizing concept,
Mhm.
functional phenomenology.
Yeah.
You need to unpack that one for us?
Absolutely, yeah. It might sound kind of like a mouthful, I know.
It does.
But the idea itself is actually pretty intuitive. Like, imagine you're looking at a tree, right?
Okay.
What actually makes up that experience for you?
Okay, so I'm seeing its shape,
Yeah.
the texture of the bark,
Mm-hmm.
the way the leaves move in the wind, like all of that.
Exactly. And each of those individual elements is contributing to this overall experience you're having of seeing a tree.
Okay.
And so functional phenomenology breaks these kinds of complex experiences down
Mm.
into their core components.
Okay.
And by doing that, it kind of helps us connect those subjective experiences to specific brain processes.
So it's like taking a magnifying glass to our experiences.
Yes.
We're zooming in on the individual brushstrokes that make up this whole picture.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And just like how an art critic might analyze those brushstrokes to, understand the artist's technique or whatever,
Mhm.
researchers can use functional phenomenology to analyze the components of experience
Okay.
to get a better idea of how our brains actually work.
This reminds me a bit of those brain imaging studies where they show people different images and they see which parts of their brain light up.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
It's a similar concept. By
Mhm.
isolating these specific aspects of an experience,
Well,
researchers can use those brain imaging techniques to see, okay, which neural networks are involved in actually processing those individual components.
oh, and so bringing it back to our tree,
Yeah,
researchers could potentially see which parts of the brain are activated when someone is focused on, say, the tree's shape versus its color versus the movement, all the stuff we were just talking about.
exactly. And that gives us a way more detailed and nuanced understanding of how visual perception actually works.
This functional phenomenology approach seems so powerful,
Yeah.
honestly. But is it just a one-way street? With phenomenology just informing science?
Yes.
Or is there a back and forth happening between the two?
Yeah, that's a really crucial point. And Pokropski definitely emphasizes it's a two-way street. He calls it mutual constraints.
Okay.
Meaning that, phenomenology and cognitive science, they can actually challenge and refine each other's findings.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's like having two experts in
Yeah.
a conversation,
Right.
pushing each other to think more deeply and rigorously about what they're doing.
I like that. It's like they're holding each other accountable, right?
Right, exactly.
Making sure each side is actually grounded in both, those subjective and objective realms.
Exactly. And that, like back and forth, that's where the real magic happens. For example, phenomenologists might offer like a super detailed description of
Right.
how we experience a certain phenomenon, like our sense of agency, that feeling of like being in control of our own actions.
Which, now that you mention it, is something we totally take for granted until it's gone.
Exactly. And so then those phenomenological insights can then inspire new experiments, new research questions in cognitive science.
Right.
So researchers might design studies to investigate the neural mechanisms that are underlying that sense of agency. And then, boom, we have a deeper understanding of how our brains actually create that feeling in the first
So
place.
there's like this continuous loop of discovery
Yeah,
with each field, like, informing and inspiring the other one.
exactly.
That's so cool. But what does all this mean for the people listening right now? Why should they care about this, seemingly complex relationship between like phenomenology and cognitive science?
That's a great question. I think one of the most exciting aspects of this whole approach is its potential to like totally transform how we understand ourselves and honestly the world around us. Like by bridging the gap between subjective experience and objective data, we get a way richer and like just more holistic view of what it means to be human.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about these potential benefits.
Well, for starters, this research has huge implications for like mental health.
Right.
Like imagine being able to actually combine a patient's subjective experience of their condition
Hmm.
with objective brain data.
Okay.
This could lead to way more personalized and effective treatments that are tailored to like each individual's needs.
That would be incredible. It's like we're moving towards a more compassionate and individualized approach to like mental health care.
Yes.
One that values both, the inner and the outer worlds.
Exactly. And beyond the whole mental health thing, these ideas also have the potential to like completely revolutionize fields like education and artificial intelligence.
Wow, I hadn't even considered those applications, honestly.
Right. It's pretty mind-blowing when you start to think about the possibilities. Like, for example, imagine designing educational tools that aren't just engaging, but also tailored to the unique learning styles and experiences of like individual students.
That would be amazing. Instead of the whole like one size fits all approach, we could have these educational experiences that like really resonate with each learner.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's AI. Imagine creating machines that can not only like process information, but also truly understand and respond to the nuanced experiences of the humans they're interacting with.
So instead of those like, frustratingly robotic customer service chatbots,
Yes.
we could have like AI systems that are actually empathetic and like genuinely helpful.
Yeah.
Sign me up for that future.
Right. It's a future where technology isn't just intelligent, but it's also like deeply human-centered.
I love that. This is all so incredibly exciting, but I'm not going to lie, I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we've only just like scratched the surface of what's possible when we actually bridge this gap between phenomenology and cognitive science.
You're absolutely right. And that's like the beauty of a deep dive like this. It's not about like giving you all the answers.
Right.
It's more about like sparking curiosity and inviting our listeners to continue exploring these ideas long after the episode is over.
Absolutely. But before we, wrap up this section, I want to circle back to something you said earlier
Okay.
about this research helping us to like understand ourselves on this deeper level.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more for us?
Of course. So Pokropski, he emphasizes that one of the core principles of like phenomenology is the value of your own unique experience.
Okay, so it's not just about like, the abstract theories or the scientific data.
Right.
It's about connecting those ideas back to our everyday lives, our personal experiences.
Exactly. And that's honestly where the real power of this approach lies, by like, really paying attention to how you experience the world. Your thoughts, feelings, your perceptions, you can actually gain incredible insights into yourself and your place in like the grand scheme of things.
It's like we're being encouraged to like become more mindful of our own inner landscape.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that kind of like self-awareness can be incredibly transformative.
I'm starting to see how this all connects.
Yeah.
But how exactly do we actually cultivate that kind of like, mindfulness and awareness in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah.
Any tips for our listeners who are like, eager to put these ideas into practice?
Oh, there's so many ways to approach that. But one like really simple yet powerful practice is to like just pause throughout your day and just tune into your senses.
Okay, I can try that. What else?
Notice the sights, the sounds, smells, textures around you.
Hmm.
Pay attention to your breath, become curious about your thoughts and emotions without judgment.
So it's about, like, slowing down and really savoring the present moment,
Yes.
noticing all those, like, often overlooked details of our experience.
Exactly. And as you practice this kind of mindfulness, you might be surprised by like the insights that emerge.
Okay.
You might start to notice like patterns in your thinking or become more attuned to like your emotional landscape.
This is all starting to make so much sense. By paying attention to our own, like, subjective experiences,
Mm.
we can gain this deeper understanding of ourselves and, like, how our minds actually work.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that your experience matters,
Mm-hmm.
that it holds valuable information about like who you are and how you interact with the world.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I feel like I've gained this, like, whole new perspective on, consciousness, my brain, even just the simple act of, like, experiencing the world around me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But before we get too carried away with all this newfound awareness, I think it's time for another quick break.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our deep dive into phenomenology and cognitive science. Don't go anywhere.
And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into phenomenology and cognitive science. It's been like a wild ride.
It has, exploring how our inner experiences in the physical world, like, actually connect.
Totally. We've covered so much. Like, remember naturalizing phenomenology
Yeah,
and all that stuff about mutual constraints? It's a lot.
it is.
But now I kind of want to bring it back to that big question we started with.
Okay, yeah.
What does it even mean to, like, be conscious?
The million-dollar question, right.
Right.
And honestly, we might not have all the answers yet,
Yeah.
but I think looking at these ideas through phenomenology, it gives us this whole fresh perspective.
Totally. It's like we're shifting from just trying to solve consciousness to
Right.
like actually appreciating how complex and like multifaceted it really is.
Exactly. Instead of it being this, like, problem to be solved,
Right.
we're starting to see it as this, like, fundamental part of being human.
Something to be explored and understood on its own terms.
And that exploration, like we've been saying, it can lead to these crazy insights
Totally.
with the potential to, like, change everything. Mental health, artificial intelligence, you name it.
Absolutely. Like, just imagine a future where we actually get consciousness.
Hmm.
And we can use that knowledge to build AI that's not just smart, but actually empathetic.
Yeah.
Or therapies that don't just treat the symptoms, but like the whole person.
Right.
Because we actually understand each person's unique experience.
Those possibilities are, like, honestly mind-blowing.
They are.
And it all comes back to this idea, those inner experiences, the stuff we usually overlook,
Right.
that stuff is important, like, really powerful.
Absolutely. By tuning into our own inner world, by listening to what our own consciousness is telling us,
Yeah.
we can understand so much more
Mm.
about ourselves, about the universe, everything.
This has been incredible. Thank you so much for, like, guiding us through all of this.
It's been my pleasure. Always a good time to dive into these ideas with someone so curious.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Hopefully this sparked your curiosity and left you with a sense of wonder about this amazing world of consciousness, the one that's inside all of us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those big questions, and keep diving deep.